My sister found out she wasn't our dad's daughter, abandoned us for her bio dad. Now she's back, broke, and desperate for a piece of the inheritance. I never thought I'd find myself writing something like this, but here I am. I guess I just need to get it all out, say it, somehow, to someone who isn't tangled up in the mess of it all. Maybe an outside perspective will help. Because for years now, this whole thing has been eating me alive. And just when I thought I'd made peace with it, life went and made it even more complicated. It all goes back to 5 years ago, to what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my sister Lisa's life. Instead, her wedding turned into an absolute disaster, one that tore our family apart in ways I never could have imagined. Even now, it's hard to talk about. But to make any sense of how things fell apart, I have to start from the beginning. At the time, I was 28, and Lisa was 25. If you asked anyone who knew us back then, they'd probably tell you we were unnaturally close, like, borderline weirdly attached. And honestly, they weren't wrong. Even though I was older by just over a year, it never really felt like it. We moved through life together, side by side, like we were one person split in two. Borrowing each other's clothes without asking, sharing the same group of friends, finishing each other's sentences, we were always in each other's business. Our mom used to joke that if you invited one of us somewhere, you automatically got the other, like some kind of buy one get one deal. Thinking back on those years makes my chest ache. We really did everything together. I can still picture us sprawled out on my bed at 2 a.m. on a school night, stuffing our faces with snacks we'd hidden from mom, whispering about whatever nonsense was rattling around in our teenage brains. And we had a whole system for covering for each other, too. If Lisa wanted to sneak off to a party our parents would never in a million years approve of, I'd tell them she was at Sarah's house studying. And when I wanted to see a guy who, looking back, was not exactly a great life choice, Lisa would swear up and down that I was at the library. Somehow, we never got caught. We had the whole partners in crime thing down to an art. One of our biggest shared obsessions? Our future weddings. Lisa was dead set on a dreamy spring wedding, completely covered in cherry blossoms. She'd spend hours flipping through wedding magazines, showing me photos of gorgeous Japanese gardens, imagining how she'd recreate the whole look. Meanwhile, I had my heart set on a dramatic winter wedding, complete with fake snow and glittering icicle lights. We used to joke that we'd have to plan them exactly 6 months apart, just so we could each be the other's maid of honor without stealing each other's thunder. Looking back now, it's almost painful to remember. If someone had told me back then how things would actually play out, I wouldn't have believed them. So when Lisa got engaged to her college sweetheart, James, it felt like everything was finally falling into place. He was exactly the kind of guy we used to dream about during those late-night chats, sweet, funny, and completely devoted to her. When she asked me to be her maid of honor, we both knew it was just a formality. There was never any other option. We jumped into wedding planning full speed ahead, flipping through magazines, making Pinterest boards, touring venues. It was just like when we were kids, playing pretend. Only this time, it was real. Our parents had split up when we were teenagers. I was 16, Lisa was 15. The divorce wasn't pretty, but to their credit, they managed to stay civil for our sake. A few years later, Mom remarried a guy named Steve. He was a good man, kind, patient, always making an effort to include us in his life without ever trying to take Dad's place. Meanwhile, Dad stayed single, throwing himself into his real estate business. He always said he didn't need anything else, his daughters were his whole world. When it came to Lisa's wedding, both parents agreed to split the costs evenly. But Dad, who had done really well in his business, insisted that she have absolutely everything she wanted. "My little girl only gets married once," he'd say, his face lighting up every time we showed him a new wedding idea. And then, just 2 weeks before the big day, everything fell apart. Lisa and I were at Mom's house, digging through old photo albums for the wedding reception slideshow. We wanted to include all our childhood favorites, matching Easter dresses, family trips to the beach, Dad teaching us to ride bikes. We were up in the attic, surrounded by dusty boxes and old memories, when Lisa found a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. At first, we thought they were love letters, something sweet and sentimental from when our parents were younger. Lisa picked one up and started reading it out loud, laughing. But then her laughter stopped. Her face went pale. Her hands started to shake. The letters weren't from Dad. They were from a man named Michael. And they weren't just old love notes, they were desperate, heartbreaking pleas. Pleas from a man who had once loved our mother. Pleas from a man who, according to these letters, had been begging to be a part of his child's life. A child who, it turned out, was Lisa. I will never forget the way Lisa looked in that moment, the way realization crashed over her. All her life, she had been Dad's girl. While I had always been more independent, Lisa had clung to him, following him around his workshop, soaking up everything he taught her. She even went to college for business because she wanted to take over his real estate company one day. And now, in the span of a few minutes, everything she thought she knew about herself was ripped away. The confrontation with Mom was like a bomb going off. Lisa stormed into the kitchen, waving the letters in her hands, demanding answers. Mom took one look at them and crumbled. Through tears, she confessed everything. Michael had been a co-worker. They had a brief affair during a rough patch in her marriage. And when she found out she was pregnant, she made a choice to stay with Dad, to raise Lisa as his, to never tell anyone the truth. She begged us to understand. She had been young, scared. She only wanted to protect her family. Lisa wasn't having any of it. She was determined to tell Dad before the wedding. I tried to talk her out of it, told her to wait until after the ceremony, to think about what this would do to her big day. But she looked at me like I was insane. How am I supposed to walk down the aisle with him, knowing my whole life has been a lie, she said. How can I let him give a father of the bride speech when he's not even my real father? I should have supported her. Instead, I tried to protect everyone's feelings, to smooth things over. I thought I was doing the right thing. But looking back now, I realize how wrong I was. She had every right to know the truth. And she had every right to tell it. The day we told Dad changed everything. Lisa refused to face Dad alone, so I went with her. She needed the support, and honestly, I wasn't sure how Dad was going to react. We found him in his workshop, completely absorbed in a project. He was making something special for Lisa, a wedding gift. We didn't know it at the time, but it was a handcrafted jewelry box, something he had been working on for weeks. When Lisa handed him the letters, everything changed. Dad sank down onto his workbench, the half-finished box still in his hands, forgotten. I'll never forget the way his face looked in that moment, stunned, like someone had knocked the wind out of him. But even through the shock and the hurt, his first thought was for Lisa. "Sweetheart," he said, his voice soft but steady, "I need you to understand something. Being a father isn't about biology. It's about love. And I have loved you every single day of your life. That will never change." He told her he would still walk her down the aisle if that's what she wanted. But Lisa was too overwhelmed to even think about the wedding anymore. She postponed everything, saying she needed time to process. And that was the moment things truly started to unravel. Lisa became obsessed with finding Michael. She spent hours online, chasing down every possible lead. When she finally found him on social media, he was surprisingly eager to meet her. Unlike Dad, Michael had never married, never had any other children. He seemed thrilled to welcome Lisa into his life, and at first, their meetings were just about satisfying curiosity, getting to know each other, filling in the gaps. But before long, it became something more. Lisa started pulling away from us. The more time she spent with Michael, the less she seemed to belong to our family. She became fascinated by the things they had in common, their shared love of photography, the little quirks they both had without even realizing it. Michael showed her old family albums, pointed out resemblances, told her she had her grandmother's eyes and her aunt's smile. Every new connection she found with his side of the family seemed to push her further from ours. And that's when I made what Lisa now calls my unforgivable betrayal. I couldn't stand to watch Dad suffer. The daughter he had raised for 25 years, the little girl he had carried on his shoulders, taught to ride a bike, stayed up late worrying about she was slipping away, piece by piece. One evening, after she canceled yet another dinner with Dad to spend time with Michael, I snapped. I confronted her. I reminded her of all the things Dad had done for her, every dance recital he had sat through, every late-night monster check under her bed, every sacrifice he had made to give her the life she had. Michael might be your biological father, I told her, but he wasn't the one who was there for you when it mattered. Lisa's face darkened. You don't get it, she shot back. You've always known exactly who you are. You're Dad's real daughter. I've been living a lie my whole life. And now, every time I look in the mirror, I don't even know who I'm seeing. What parts of me come from a complete stranger? That was the moment everything between us changed. She accused me of taking Dad's side, of not supporting her in figuring out who she really was. The distance between us grew wider and wider until, eventually, she made a choice that shattered what was left of our relationship. She moved to California to be closer to Michael. The final blow came months later. Lisa decided to go through with her wedding, but instead of the big ceremony we had spent years dreaming about, she had a small, intimate ceremony in California. And Michael, her newfound father, was the one who walked her down the aisle. Dad and I weren't invited. We found out the same way everyone else did, through Facebook photos a mutual friend had posted. Dad tried to act like it didn't bother him, but I knew better. He had already bought her wedding gift, not just the jewelry box he had been making, but a down payment on a house. He never asked for the money back, just quietly transferred it to her account with a note that said, I hope this helps you build a happy life. For the next few years, Lisa and I barely spoke. I'd send the occasional message, trying to keep some kind of connection, but she was always distant, cold. Meanwhile, I got closer to Dad. Losing Lisa broke something in him. He fell into a deep depression, but I refused to let him go through it alone. I started visiting him all the time, making sure he was never left out of my life. We had Sunday dinners together. I even started learning about the real estate business, not because I wanted to take over anymore, but because it made him happy to teach me. And then, 2 years ago, something changed. At first, it was little things: Dad forgetting appointments, losing track of conversations, misplacing his keys in the strangest spots. But then he started getting confused while driving, even in places he had known for decades. After a few too many close calls, I finally convinced him to see a doctor. The diagnosis was brutal. Early onset Alzheimer's. The doctor said there were medications that could slow it down, but we needed to start planning for the future while Dad was still able to make decisions. So he did. He put his affairs in order, made me his power of attorney, and decided to leave the majority of his estate to me: his house, his business, his savings. I tried to argue. Lisa is still your daughter, I told him. She should get an equal share. But Dad was firm. This isn't about punishing Lisa, he said. It's about making sure everything I built goes to someone who understands it, who cares about it. You've proven that you do. For a while, things were quiet. And then, last month, Lisa found out about the will. Suddenly, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls, texts, one after another. She said she had done a lot of soul-searching. That she realized she had been unfair to both me and Dad. That she missed me. That she wanted to fix things. And for a second, I wanted to believe her. But then she started pushing me to convince Dad to change the will while he still could. She argued that she deserved an equal share. After all, hadn't he raised her as his daughter? Conveniently forgetting that she had spent the past 5 years rejecting that very relationship. She even hinted that Dad's condition could work in her favor. If he wasn't legally competent to make decisions, she could contest the will. The final straw came last week. Lisa showed up at my house unannounced. She was a mess, crying, saying her marriage was falling apart. Moving to California had been a mistake. Michael wasn't the father she had imagined him to be. He was controlling, and now that he was getting older, he had started pressuring her to take care of him, since she was his only child. She begged me to help her move back home. Said she wanted to reconnect with Dad before it was too late. So I looked her in the eyes and asked her outright, is this about Dad? Or is this about his money? And just like that, the tears dried up. Her face twisted with anger. That was all the answer I needed. Lisa's eyes burned with anger. You're just being greedy, she hissed. Trying to keep all of Dad's money for yourself. You've always been his favorite. Her voice dripped with bitterness. Ever since I found out the truth, you've been poisoning him against me, making sure you get everything in the end. I just stood there, staring at her, feeling a mix of frustration and exhaustion settle deep in my bones. It didn't matter what I said. She had already decided I was the villain in this story. You don't get to just walk back into our lives when it's financially convenient, I told her, my voice steady but cold. She didn't like that. With one last glare, she turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. And just like that, the final shred of hope I had for fixing things between us walked out with her. Now, Lisa is telling anyone who will listen that I manipulated Dad into cutting her out of his will. She's spinning a whole story about how I turned him against her, making myself look like the perfect, devoted daughter while pushing her out of the family for good. She even reached out to Mom, despite barely speaking to her for years. But to Mom's credit, she isn't taking sides. I lost the right to have an opinion on Dad's decisions the day I lied about Lisa's paternity, she told me. And for once, I actually agree with her. Still, I feel torn. Dad's condition is getting worse. Some days, he doesn't remember what year it is. Sometimes, he calls me by Lisa's name. I just want his final years to be peaceful. And a part of me wonders, should I push him to change the will? Should I convince him to give Lisa something, just to keep the peace? She's still my sister. I hate that money is causing this rift between us. But at the same time, she made her choice 5 years ago. She turned her back on Dad. She turned her back on me. And now, the moment there's an inheritance involved, she suddenly wants to make things right? It doesn't feel like love. It feels like manipulation. Update 1. Wow. I never expected so many people to respond. Reading through your comments has been eye-opening. You've made me realize things I hadn't even fully processed. A lot of you had questions, and some of your advice really stuck with me, so I wanted to give an update. First, the inheritance. After thinking it over, I decided to have another conversation with Dad. I picked one of his good days. His doctor explained that with early onset Alzheimer's, there are these rare moments of clarity, almost like the old days. I needed him to be fully present for this. We sat down, and I told him everything. How Lisa had hurt him. How she had pushed us away. But also how, if he had a moment of clarity later, he might regret cutting her out completely. We talked for hours. And at some point, the conversation shifted. Dad started reminiscing about Lisa as a little girl, how she used to follow him around his workshop with a tiny plastic tool set, pretending to fix things right alongside him. How she'd sit in his lap while he worked, babbling about her latest ideas. His voice grew thick with emotion, his hands trembling slightly as he spoke. Dad has always been a strong man, steady, unshakable. But in that moment, he wiped at his eyes, and it hit me just how deeply this hurt him. Maybe his decision hadn't come from logic. Maybe it had come from pain. So, we met with his lawyer. Side note, 3 hours of legal fees. Ouch. In the end, Dad found a compromise. Instead of giving Lisa a direct inheritance, he set up a trust fund for her future kids' education. It's airtight. The money can only be used for educational expenses, tuition, books, things like that. No luxury vacations or impulsive shopping sprees. And here's the kicker, Lisa has to maintain regular contact with Dad for a full year before the trust even becomes active. Monthly visits, phone calls, something real. Dad's reasoning made sense. He said this way, he's still providing for his potential grandkids, kids who shouldn't be punished for adult drama. At the same time, he's acknowledging who actually stood by him all these years. And with the contact requirement, Lisa can't just swoop in, collect the money, and disappear again. Honestly? I think it's more than fair. This whole process has forced me to face something I hadn't wanted to admit. I'm angry. At Lisa. At everything that happened. The therapist I've been seeing says it's normal to feel betrayed, but that I need to find a way to process it without letting it eat away at me. She's probably right. But it's hard when the drama never stops. For everyone asking, yes, Dad's new medication seems to be helping. He's having more good days than bad, which is a huge relief. I've started recording him telling stories when he's clear. The doctors say it might help, both for him and for us, when things get worse. It's bittersweet. But at least we're making the most of the time we have. Update 2. A lot has happened since my last update. I've been sitting here for over an hour, trying to find the words to explain it. I guess I'll just say it. Yesterday morning, I got a Facebook message. From Michael. At first, I almost deleted it. I figured it was just more drama. But something made me open it. And thank God I did. Michael told me he's been feeling guilty about his role in all of this. He admitted he should have told me the truth months ago but was afraid of losing his relationship with Lisa. And then, he dropped a bombshell. Lisa has been lying. To me. To Dad. To everyone. Her life in California? The perfect father-daughter relationship she painted with Michael? It was all an act. The truth is, things have been falling apart for over a year. Michael told me Lisa has been pressuring him to sell his house and invest in some business venture she and James got involved in. When he refused, she guilt-tripped him, throwing lost time in his face. She even tried to get his sister to convince him to take out a second mortgage. And that business venture? It's not even a real business. It's one of those sketchy MLM scams. Turns out, James got sucked into it after losing his job last year, and Lisa followed right along. But it gets worse. Michael also told me that Lisa and James have been having serious marriage problems. They've actually been secretly separated for 3 months. James moved out after a huge fight about money. And suddenly, everything clicks. Lisa isn't just after Dad's money. She's drowning. Her marriage is falling apart. She's stuck in a financial mess. And now, just like she did with Michael, she's trying to guilt her way back into Dad's life, not out of love, but out of desperation. I don't even know how to process this. But one thing is crystal clear. Lisa hasn't changed, and I have no idea what to do next. Lisa and James are drowning. That perfect, curated life she's been showing off online? A complete illusion. The truth? They're buried under a mountain of debt, courtesy of the MLM scam they got tangled up in. Michael's message had already turned my understanding of everything upside down, but before I could even process it all, Lisa showed up at my doorstep. This time, she wasn't alone. James was with her. Apparently, they were working things out. And they had come prepared. They launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech, polished, practiced, like they had been gearing up for this moment. They talked about Dad's estate, how it wasn't fair that I was getting everything. Lisa, in her most gentle, understanding voice, went on and on about how she had forgiven Dad for rejecting her and how she was finally ready to be his daughter again. She played it perfectly, the devoted, remorseful daughter, ready to put the past behind her. I let them talk. I let them spin their version of events for 10 full minutes. Then, without a word, I pulled out my phone and started reading Michael's message out loud. I wish I had recorded Lisa's face. She went from calm and composed to sheer panic in seconds. James, meanwhile, didn't even try to play it off. He just stood up and walked out. I guess he hadn't known that Lisa had been lying to Michael, too. With James gone, Lisa broke. She crumbled right there in my living room, sobbing so hard she could barely get the words out. And for the first time, I heard the whole truth. Their picture-perfect California life had been falling apart for years. James lost his job over a year ago. Desperate, he got sucked into some health supplement MLM scheme, convinced it was their ticket to financial freedom. Lisa, seeing no other options, threw everything they had into it. They burned through their savings, maxed out every credit card, took out personal loans. Now, they were over $100,000 in debt. Lisa admitted she had been playing up the long-lost daughter angle with Michael for months, trying to get money out of him. When that didn't work, she turned to Plan B, convincing Dad to change his will and, failing that, guilt-tripping me into giving her a bigger share of the inheritance. She was desperate. She didn't know what else to do. And for a moment, I almost felt bad for her. Because the Lisa standing in front of me wasn't the manipulative, polished version I'd been dealing with for years. She was scared, drowning, lost. But then another thought hit me. For years, she had been manipulating everyone. Playing Dad, playing Michael, playing me, twisting the truth to suit her needs. And the worst part? She made Dad feel guilty for abandoning her, when in reality, she was the one who had walked away. I took a breath, trying to push down the anger bubbling up inside me. "You need to tell Dad," I said. Lisa hesitated. She started making excuses, his condition, his stress, how she didn't want to upset him. I shook my head. "No. Either you tell him the truth, or I will." Her face fell. Finally, after a long pause, she whispered, "Okay. But I need you there." The conversation with Dad was intense. We caught him on one of his good days, sharp, fully present, himself. Lisa sat across from him, wringing her hands, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Then, slowly, she told him everything. The debt, the lies, the manipulation, James losing his job. By the time she finished, there was silence. Uncomfortable. Heavy. Dad just sat there, staring at her. Not angry. Not even disappointed. Just quiet. And then, out of nowhere, he started laughing. Lisa and I both froze. Not the reaction we were expecting. "This reminds me of when you were 7, he said, shaking his head. "You broke my favorite coffee mug. And instead of just telling me, you spent a whole week crafting this elaborate story about how the dog knocked it over." Lisa blinked. "You knew?" "Of course I knew," Dad chuckled. "But I let you run with it because I wanted to see how far you'd take it." Then he sighed, his face softening. "You've always been like this, Lizzie," he said quietly. "Creating complicated solutions to simple problems. Just like your mother." Lisa looked down, swallowing hard. Dad sighed. Then his voice grew serious. "I get that you're in a tough spot," he said. "But lying and manipulating people isn't the way out." For the first time in years, they actually talked. Not in surface-level niceties. Not in guilt-tripping, passive-aggressive comments. Really talked. And by the end of it, Dad made a decision. He was going to help Lisa and James. But on his terms. Asterisk, they have to move back home. Asterisk, they have to get real jobs, no more MLM garbage. Asterisk, they have to go to financial counseling. He agreed to pay off their debt, but only under a legally binding agreement that they would pay him back in monthly installments. The money? It would come from his current assets. Not the inheritance. And as for his will? Nothing changes. The bulk of his estate still goes to me, with a trust set aside for Lisa's future kids if she ever has any. But honestly? After everything that happened, I don't even care about the money anymore. Watching Lisa and Dad finally reconnect, watching them start to rebuild something real that feels worth more than any inheritance. Lisa and James are already apartment hunting, looking for a place close to Dad. She's talking about coordinating schedules so that someone is always with him, making sure he's taken care of. A month ago, I would have been suspicious. But now, for the first time in years, I actually believe her. I know we have a long way to go. There's still trust to rebuild. Lisa and James have a ton of work ahead of them to fix their lives. But for the first time in forever, It feels like we might actually have a shot at being a family again. A real one. Michael texted me tonight, asking how everything went. I told him the truth. He seemed relieved, like a weight had been lifted. He said he still wants to have a relationship with Lisa, but with healthier boundaries this time. And honestly, that's probably for the best. Someone commented on my last post, saying, "Sometimes people have to hit rock bottom before they can start climbing back up." Maybe that's what Lisa needed. She had to lose everything to finally understand what really mattered. Dad always used to say, the true test of a person isn't whether they make mistakes. It's how they handle things once those mistakes catch up with them. I guess we'll see if Lisa passes the test this time. Edit. Thank you all for your support. A lot of you have asked if I'll do another update. I probably will once Lisa and James get settled. Fingers crossed. Final update. Yes, Lisa and James did move back. They found a small apartment 10 minutes from Dad's house. Lisa and James have officially settled in. Their new apartment is tiny compared to the place they had in California, but Lisa told me the other day that for the first time in years, it actually feels like home. Maybe because she's not pretending anymore. Maybe because, for the first time in a long time, she's not running. They both have real jobs now. No more MLM nonsense, no get-rich-quick schemes. James landed a job at a local company working in IT. Turns out, when he's not chasing scams, he's actually pretty good with computers. Lisa's working as an office manager at a medical practice, and honestly, she's thriving. She's always been good at keeping things organized, she just never had to use that skill in a way that actually mattered before. And the debt? So far, they haven't missed a single payment to Dad. Lisa's even been working extra hours just to pay it off faster. I know some people might think Dad was too generous by helping them, and honestly, I get it. But seeing Lisa actually own her mistakes and put in the work to fix them has done more for their relationship than any punishment ever could. And at the end of the day, maybe that's what really mattered. Taking care of Dad. The biggest shift, though, has been in how we take care of Dad. Lisa and I worked out a schedule. She takes Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturday mornings. I handle Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sunday afternoons. We switch off Fridays. It's actually working. Dad gets consistent care, and neither of us is completely drowning. And honestly, if you had told me a year ago that Lisa and I would be partners in this, I wouldn't have believed you. Dad's condition. As for Dad himself, we're doing what we can. The doctors say the medication is helping slow things down, but we all see the changes. The bad days are outnumbering the good ones now. Some days, he calls me by Lisa's name. Some days, he calls Lisa by mine. Some days, he doesn't recognize either of us at all. And then there are the days where he slips into the past, fully convinced we're still teenagers. But even on his worst days, he just seems happier. Having both of us around together, it's like something inside him finally settled. Lisa has been amazing with him, and I never thought I'd say that. She just knows how to handle him. When he's lost in another time, another version of reality, she doesn't correct him. She just goes with it. Last month, we had a really tough day. Dad had completely forgotten the truth about Mom. He didn't remember the affair. Didn't remember that Lisa wasn't biologically his. All he remembered was their old camping trips when she was little. And Lisa? She let him have it. She smiled, listened, played along as he talked about fishing and roasting marshmallows, about how she used to sit on his shoulders so she could see the stars better. Later that night, I found her in the kitchen, crying. I sat down next to her. "Are you okay?" I asked. She wiped at her eyes and gave this small, sad laugh. "You know what's weird," she said. "Those camping trips actually happened. I just forgot." She swallowed hard, staring at the table. I spent so many years chasing after Michael, trying to find something I thought was missing. But I wasn't missing anything. Dad was always there, I just couldn't see it. She shook her head. I almost lost him over a lie. I didn't say anything. Because, really, what was there to say? She had to figure that out on her own. Michael. Speaking of Michael, that situation has changed too. After everything that happened, he and Lisa took some space. Now, they have what she calls a coffee shop relationship. Once a month, they meet for coffee. They keep things light. No heavy conversations. No talk about the past. No discussions about money or obligations. And you know what? That actually seems to be working for both of them. Michael has even stopped introducing her as his long-lost daughter. Now, he just calls her Lisa. And somehow, that feels better. The inheritance. As for Dad's will? Nothing's changed. The bulk of the estate is still going to me. The education trust is still there for Lisa's future kids, if she ever has any. But the weird thing? It doesn't feel important anymore. Lisa and I actually talked about it the other day, and she admitted something that kind of hit me hard. She told me the inheritance was never really about the money for me. I frowned. Then what was it about? She exhaled, looking down. I thought that getting a bigger share would prove that Dad loved me as much as you, she admitted. But now I realize I was measuring the wrong thing all along. No Hallmark ending. Look, I know how this all probably sounds. Like some cheesy Hallmark movie where everything just magically falls into place. But trust me, it's not. Lisa and I still fight sometimes. Dad still has really bad days. The debt isn't magically gone. Years of hurt don't disappear overnight. But for the first time in a long time, we're actually trying. We're showing up for each other. And maybe that's all we ever really needed. Edit. Thank you all for the support. I've had so many people ask if I'll do another update, and honestly, I think I will. Because for the first time in years, it feels like we're finally headed somewhere good. Yes, Lisa and James did move back. They found a little apartment 10 minutes from Dad's house. And for the first time in forever, it actually feels like we're a family again.